Recently, the Paramount-owned CBS television network not only canceled talk show host Stephen Colbert, but the entire Late Show franchise. So this week, let's look back at the history of the late-night talk show and what this latest move might mean. I'm Larry Fedoruk, and this is Later That Same Life. On each episode of my weekly podcast, a different topic, discussion, or story from our lives.
Season 17, Chapter 9.
Colbert Canceled.
The reason there is even a late show with Stephen Colbert on CBS is because there was a David Letterman. And it was a David Letterman because there was NBC and The Tonight Show and Johnny Carson and a special appearance by Jay Leno. The history is important and interesting, and I'll get into that shortly. First of all, the cancellation of Colbert, which CBS said was simply a budgetary move against the challenging and changing face of the media landscape, blah, 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 the same sad cry they've been making for the last 20 years. It could be that, except the timing and circumstances are suspicious. The three traditional major U.S. television networks today are all part of much bigger entertainment conglomerates, either through acquisition or merger. ABC is a Disney property, NBC is part of Universal, and CBS, Paramount. Let's follow the money here. The Redstone family has historically held the controlling share of Paramount CBS through a company called National Amusements. How's that for a name? National Amusements. Sound like they make yo-yos or Ferris wheels. They don't. At least I'm pretty sure. Head of National Amusements is Sherry Redstone, who recently expressed a desire to divest herself of the controlling interest. The lead buyer, offering $8 billion, is Skydance Media, also a global entertainment company. Skydance is run by David Ellison, who founded the company about 20 years ago. David is the son of Larry Ellison, who created Oracle, and is one of the world's richest men, worth around $250 billion, and a staunch Trump supporter. Skydance has been a very successful media company, but it was founded and funded with Oracle money. Here you go, kid. Start yourself a company. Try not to screw it up. A sale of this magnitude requires several high-level government approvals, including one by the FCC, the Federal Communications Commission in the U.S. Normally, the U.S. president does not control the FCC or otherwise interfere, but as we know, Donald Trump is not a normal president. Trump has already been using his presidential powers, some of them questionable, to attack business, education, the legal system, and media. He has personally sued ABC and CBS, both settling out of court. In the CBS case, they paid Trump himself $16 million after being accused of editing a Kamala Harris interview on 60 Minutes during the presidential campaign to make her look more favorable. Even CBS lawyers said the lawsuit had no merit, but they settled. Why? Many say it was a bribe paid to the president so that he would not interfere in the approval of the $8 billion deal. The executive producer for 60 Minutes since resigned, citing a loss of journalistic integrity. And apparently the staff at the long-running investigative journalism show is in turmoil. Stephen Colbert, already an unabashed critic of Trump, made the accusation on The Late Show, incriminating the very network that pays him, said that CBS gave Trump, these are Colbert's own words, a big fat bribe.
It's a big fat bribe.
Within 72 hours of that show, CBS announces that Colbert is canceled, and no other Late Show would be on the network at all. The show would go on for another 10 months, ending May of 2026. Was there an extortion by the president? Was the $16 million a bribe? Was there a phone call from Trump or one of his toadies? Hey, axe Colbert, or your deal will not go through. Everyone thinks so. No one really knows. As I said, the timing and circumstance, very suspicious. And within a week of Colbert's dismissal, the FCC suddenly approves the sale of Paramount CBS to Skydance. For their part, CBS said the decision was purely a financial one, made while Colbert was on his summer vacation and not when he returned and made those monologue remarks.
It's big fat bribe.
They said it was financial, not political. Okay, well, maybe two things can be true all at once. While the late-night talk show is an increasingly challenging financial model, expensive to produce, facing audience fragmentation and digital competition, okay, but you also have a menacing, mood-swinging megalomaniac at 1600 Pennsylvania Avenue who would kibosh an $8 billion deal on a whim. Just get rid of Colbert. It's financial, it's political, it's existential. Media is business. I wish there was a better model for it, but I can't think of one. No one can. Media, any media, establishes an influence on a group of people, and companies will pay media for access to that influence, advertising. And if not enough people are paying for the access to the influence of Stephen Colbert gets canceled. You can make anything else out of it that you want, and you may be right, but it's the bottom line. And you know where we get the term bottom line, right? From business, the financial ledger. The Late Show with Stephen Colbert is the #1 rated late-night talk show on network television. Whatever that means. I can tell you, it means a lot less than it used to. Colbert's nightly average audience is around 2.5 million viewers. Johnny Carson had about 11 million nightly. When Leno and Letterman were battling it out, they had 6, 7, or 8 nightly, depending, with Leno always having a slight edge. Colbert, 2.5. Now, the YouTube video of Colbert making the bribe comments, 3 million views. The show where he announced that he was canceled, 3.5 million YouTube hits. That is emblematic of the problem. People are not watching Colbert on the couch at night with all the ads. They're watching just a part of him on their phone the next morning, waiting for the Uber, counting the 10 seconds down to hit skip on any ad that may come up. How long before Disney, ABC goes, hey, what are we spending on Kimmel? And why? Do you think they haven't had that meeting already? Harder to imagine that NBC Universal would cancel Fallon and The Tonight Show. You know, that's the show that started it all. This would be a good time for a brief history of late-night talk on TV, from the beginning to the peak, that clumsy handoff to Leno, the clumsier transition to Conan, then back to Leno, Letterman, all the rest, and up to Colbert. Perhaps the first domino in what may be the fall of it all. The Tonight Show started on NBC in the fall of 1954, hosted by the now legendary Steve Allen, the golden era of television. Jack Paar hosted Tonight from 1957 to 1962. Then came a young, gawky comedian and game show host from Nebraska, Johnny Carson, who became king of late night for almost all of his 30-year run. It was really Carson who turned that time slot and, that show into a franchise, a going concern, a TV powerhouse, a moneymaker. And remember, the show used to run 90 minutes. So successful that NBC decided to add the Tomorrow Show at 1 a.m., a much simpler one-on-one interview show hosted by Tom Snyder. It went almost 9 years. That's important to note because it was creating content and an audience for original material even after Johnny said goodnight. The other networks only occasionally tried to compete with Johnny. In 1967, ABC aired The Joey Bishop Show. Joey Bishop was a comedian, part of the Rat Pack. Frank Sinatra, Dean Martin, Sammy Davis Jr., Peter Lawford, Joey Bishop. They were all in the original Ocean's 11. On that short-lived talk show, Bishop's sidekick was Regis Philbin, his first exposure to a national audience. From 1969 to 1975, Dick Cavett also hosted a talk show on ABC, but they never tried it at late night up against Carson. CBS's first attempt to dethrone The Tonight Show was Merv Griffin, 1969 to 1972. Eventually, they gave up. Merv went on to have a daytime show up against the likes of Mike Douglas. Yeah, I'm just throwing out talk show names now. Of course, Merv went on to success as the creator of Jeopardy and the Wheel of Fortune. Speaking of the wheel, People always enjoyed how quirky and funny Pat Sajak was and how he could talk to the contestants. So, hey, we should give Pat Sajak a talk show on CBS. 1989 to 90. Barely lasted the year. Is there a C, Pat? Yes, there's 2 C's. I'd like to solve the puzzle. Canceled. Pat quickly returned to talking to the contestants. Your turn to spin the wheel. Quick sidebar story I'm not sure everyone knows. Carson aired Monday through Friday on NBC with a compilation Carson Best of rerun Saturday nights in that 11:30 time slot. By 1972, Carson and The Tonight Show had moved to Los Angeles, and Carson loved his boat and his tennis. To accommodate more tennis time, Carson, who was very powerful at the time, negotiated a new contract where he had Mondays off. That meant that Carson rerun would now go on Mondays, and 11:30 on Saturday night was now open. They didn't really want to spend any money, so they asked a young producer in New York, Lorne Michaels, to come up with something. He put together a bunch of newbie sketch actors. In 1975, Saturday Night Live, SNL, because Johnny wanted to play more tennis. By 1980, Carson went to 1 hour long. NBC was looking to end the Tomorrow franchise, plus they wanted something for a young comedian they had under contract, David Letterman. Letterman had a brief daytime show on NBC, ran at 9 o'clock in the morning, and it was so way off the usual game show soap opera fare of the day. It lasted 3 months, but the critics and the young people loved it. At least they thought it was innovative. So by February of 1982, they introduced Late Night with David Letterman on NBC at 12:30. It was sort of a rougher, almost unprofessional-looking version of The Tonight Show, on purpose. It actually kind of awakened that 12:30 time slot. Dave was very successful, especially on college campuses and generally among the younger audience. By 1986, Fox thought maybe they should start a TV network, which they did on the strength of shows like The X-Files, Married with Children, and The Simpsons. Joan Rivers, who had been the full-time Monday night Carson guest host, was offered her own talk show, which she took. That resulted in a Carson-Rivers feud that lasted their lifetimes. Joan's late-night talk show debuted in 1986, lasted only 7 months. Her husband, Edgar, was a producer, and he was said to be a toxic presence on the set, fighting Rupert Murdoch on everything from furniture to money. Eventually, he just fired them both. Fox tried Howard Stern for a bit. That didn't work out. Who remembers the Chevy Chase show on Fox? Wow, sure, yeah, everyone loved Chevy, right? Well, not really. He was an awkward host. It was clumsy comedy and stilted interviews. It lasted 6 weeks. Fox was ready to get out of the late-night thing altogether, but eventually settled on Arsenio Hall. Arsenio, both on Fox and in syndication, was just younger, hipper, black. The show was faster paced. It was actually one of the first real ratings threat to Carson. Lasted from 89 to 94. If anything, Arsenio Hall, along with things like Saturday Night Live and Letterman at 12:30, began to make Johnny and The Tonight Show feel old, like a relic from TV's past. That kind of talk was starting to bubble to the surface. Honorable mentions, by the way, to comedian Byron Allen. He hosted a syndicated talk show from 1989 to 92. Comedian David Brenner had a syndicated late-night TV talk show for like 15 minutes. Jon Stewart had a talk show on MTV in the early to mid-90s. Again, all of these things made Carson seem sadly irrelevant. Johnny, too, felt the pressure, decided to bow out before it was too late. Well, it kind of was already, but his last talk show aired May 22nd, 1992. Johnny loved Dave. Dave loved Johnny. Their mutual respect and friendship surely meant that Dave was the heir apparent as Tonight Show host, a job he dearly coveted. However, Johnny was on his way out. His influence was waning. Jay Leno had become the very popular, almost permanent Monday night guest host, and the only Monday night guest host, the only one who did not suffer a ratings drop from the other nights of the week when Johnny was on. As we know, it's a long story, a lot of sordid details, books have been written about it, movies have been made, but Jay got the gig. Letterman was pissed. CBS thought, is this a chance? Do we pounce now and offer Dave an 11:30 slot on our network? You know, the last time we thought this was a good idea, we went with Pat Sajak. Well, Dave is not Pat, so they made the offer. Dave took Paul Schaefer, the top 10 list, stupid pet tricks, bought some nicer suits, and The Late Show with David Letterman debuted in 1993 on CBS. And he stayed there 22 years. Colbert has since been there for 10. Can you believe that? 10? And you see, unlike NBC, CBS has not been in the late-night talk show business for more years than they have. So I'm just saying maybe another cancellation is not that strange. Dave did reinvent that 12:30 time slot with the show Late Night. So when he went to CBS, that slot was open on NBC. They first offered it to Gary Shandling, who chose not to host a talk show, but instead do a parody series of a talk show host called The Larry Sanders Show. I think we're glad he did that. NBC, on Lorne Michaels' advice, gave the show to a comedy writer, an unknown, Conan O'Brien. He hosted Late Night until 2009. After that, Jimmy Fallon was there. Currently, it's Seth Meyers. For a while, they even had a later franchise, shows at 1:30. Remember the hosts there? It was Bob Costas, Greg Kinnear, even Carson Daly for a time. Over at CBS, Dave's production company, Worldwide Pants, was also in charge of the 12:30 slot, the show that followed his. For a while, Letterman brought back Tom Snyder, but eventually that show was hosted by Craig Kilborn, Craig Ferguson. Then there was months of guest hosts before they settled on James Corden. Corden was probably the most successful in that 12:30 slot. He retired in 2023. Reports were that CBS offered him up to $50 million to stay on. I guess they weren't as cash-strapped 2 years ago. By the way, Craig Ferguson's contract stipulated that he would be next in line to replace Letterman whenever that happened. So when CBS offered the gig to Colbert instead, they had to pay off Ferguson, reportedly $10 million. We can't go through a late-night talk show history without mentioning that transition from Leno to Conan and then back to Leno. Short version, Conan was killing it at 12:30. Very popular, getting better every night. He actively began to campaign for The Tonight Show, eventually signing a contract guaranteeing that he would be the 5th host of The Tonight Show. That was in 2001. NBC neglected to tell Leno this thing until 2004, but somehow it was agreed that Leno would retire in 5 years. We all knew that. It was bizarre. Jay Leno has since publicly recounted many things about those times. He said, first of all, that during those times, Craig Ferguson had come to CBS up against Conan in that time slot and started to consistently beat Conan in the ratings, causing NBC to rethink their decision. So they asked Jay to stay on, but Jay said, look, all the contracts are signed. So they asked Jay to do a 10 o'clock talk show, which he did. And though it never really did that well, it was in fact blamed for the failure of Conan at 11:30. Although truthfully, lots of reasons, including Conan himself, were to blame for the drop in Tonight Show ratings with Conan O'Brien. Conan's Tonight Show lasted 6 months. They fired him, asked Jay to come back, which he did. Jay stayed on until Jimmy Fallon took over in 2014. Jay Leno's reputation took quite a hit because of all of this, but really most of that can be blamed on bad network maneuvers. What? Incompetent executives? What a shocker. I think Jay has been able to rehab some of his legacy in recent times. Conan went to TBS, Basic Cable, and hosted an 11 p.m. talk show there from 2010 to 2021. Network late-night talk shows were mostly an NBC-CBS game for many years. At ABC at 11:30, Ted Koppel hosted a half-hour news show called Nightline. That began as a series of special reports on the American-Iranian hostage crisis of 1979 and 80. After that was resolved, Nightline stayed on as a popular late-night news show for decades. a serious alternative to the jabbering over at CBS and NBC. However, in 2003, ABC got into the late-night talk show wars when they went with Jimmy Kimmel Live at 12:05 after Nightline. For the first year, Jimmy Kimmel was actually live. That ended in 2004. In January of 2013, they finally moved Jimmy to 11:30 up against Letterman and The Tonight Show. Nightline then followed The Kimmel Show. During the NBC Leno-Conan debacle, ABC actually offered Leno an 11:30 slot at their network, said they would move Kimmel to 12:30. That obviously never came to fruition. Couple of quick notes. David Letterman was a talk show host on network television when network television was the be-all and end-all for over 30 years. He became a household name and made millions and millions of dollars. He has his own Netflix series. But I'll bet he'd give it all up just to have been named the host of The Tonight Show back in 1992. I'll bet that despite all of his success, that still keeps him up at night. Secondly, my absolute favorite comedy streaming series right now is called Hacks. At the end of their latest season, spoiler alert, Jean Smart's character, Deborah Vance, loses her late-night talk show because of something she said on the air. A little different from the Colbert situation, but still, looks like life imitated art. What a tangled web, huh? It reportedly cost CBS $100 million annually to produce The Late Show, including salaries for Colbert and some 200 staff. They say they operated at a net loss of $40 million. CBS did recently get into a bidding war for the exclusive rights to stream all 26 seasons of South Park, which they won for $1.5 billion. And then the first episode of the new season of South Park, they lampooned Trump mercilessly. So we'll see how that goes. Hopefully that $1.5 billion is already in the bank. So again, the cancellation of Colbert, circumstance and timing, very suspicious. We don't have the money, but we do have money. We don't have it for television network, but we have it for streaming. Sure, maybe it all makes sense. But why would they leave Colbert and The Late Show on for 10 months? That seems odd. By personal experience, I can tell you, when a media company is done with you, best practice is they get your pass card and have security escort you to the door. Someone from HR will contact you shortly. As I said, I don't think the CBS Paramount move, regardless of the motivation, bodes well for all late-night talk shows. By the way, CBS Paramount also owns Comedy Central, home of The Daily Show. They are ruthless Trump critics. How long before they're asking for Jon Stewart's pass card and everyone else? Most upset in all of this, it seems, are the people on the inside, the media. And I get it, I'm upset, it's appalling. But did they not realize it's called show business? And I wonder, are they truly appalled at the cancellation? Or are they just mourning the loss of an era of the late-night TV network talk show? Sure looks like the first two stages of mourning, denial and anger.
Later That Same Life is written, voiced, and produced by Larry Fedoruk. LarryFedoruk37@gmail.com. Subscribe to Larry's podcast YouTube channel. Get automatic notifications with each new episode.
It's big fat pride.